Hi everyone, System Shogun here, and today we are diving into how to connect Microsoft Copilot Studio agents to your own APIs using Microsoft Entra ID authentication. First, we'll look at the official HTTP with Microsoft Entra ID connector, see how it works and understand why it only supports connections within the same tenant. Then we'll move on to the custom connector approach, which lets you securely call APIs across different tenants still authenticated through Microsoft Entra ID. By the end of this video, you will know exactly when to use each method and how to set them up step by step. Let's get started. Now I'm going to create a new API with Entra ID authentication, and for that I'm going to use the built-in template from Visual Studio. Let's create a new project. We'll use the Web API. We'll call it Weather API. And we'll use Microsoft Identity Platform here. Let's click on Create. Click on Next. And now we need to create a new app registration. We'll call it Weather API. Click on Register. Okay, we have our application. Let's click on Next. Next and finish. So there is only one thing left we need to do, and that's it. So we need to go to our controllers, weather forecast controller, and we need to replace this get endpoint with this one, which is practically pretty much the same. The only difference is that this one returns an array. And Copilot Studio agents don't like that, so they throw an error. So that's why we'll use this version here. Okay, now we're ready to publish our application to the tenant where our Copilot Studio instance lives. Let's go here, let's click on Publish. We'll choose Azure, we'll use Linux. We'll create a new instance. And we will leave the defaults here. Let's click on Create. Okay, so we have our resources provisioned. Now what's left is to publish our API. And let's do that. Let's click Publish. Okay, so our API has been published. And now we're in Azure. Here is our API, fully deployed. Now, let's go to Entra ID and see our app registration. And here it is. We will need some of this information soon when we create our agent. Let's go back to Copilot Studio and let's create our agent. Now we are in Copilot Studio. To create an agent, click on Create, New Agent. I'm not going to provide any details here, and I'm going to click Create. Our agent has been created. Now let's create a tool. And that tool will allow us to use Entra ID to authenticate to our API and call it. For that, we're going to be using this one. Now we need to create a new connection. For that, we need to get our URL first. Let's go back to our API. Click copy here and get our URL, paste it here. Actually, let's provide HTTPS. And here we need to go back to our application, and here we need to copy this. Now let's click on Create, and I'm going to log in with my account that lives inside the same tenant where I deployed the API and the same tenant where my Copilot Studio instance is. And let's see what happens. And we get an error, which is expected, because it says that the client app with this ID does not have the scope permissions. So this client app is Microsoft Power Platform application. It's not our app, it's global ID. For each tenant, it's the same ID. Basically, that's the Power Platform connector. So to fix that, go back to our application here and click Add a client application. Paste the client ID and add the scope here. So this allows the Power Platform to access this API. Now let's go back and try again. And done. We've successfully connected. Now let's click on Add and Configure and let's provide some details. So this is the name of this tool. We'll name it Weather Forecast. For the description, it provides weather forecasts. Now, the method that we're calling is a get, and we'll provide the path, which is weather forecast. Let's click on save, and now let's ask for the weather forecast. We allow. And here is our weather forecast. So basically we were able to connect to our API, which is authenticated with Entra ID using this connector. But there is one problem here. This connector only works for the same tenant. So basically your API needs to live in the same tenant where your Copilot Studio instance is. If you want to call an API from another tenant, well, then this won't work. And for that, you need something called a custom connector. And next, we'll create a custom connector. But basically, if we go under settings here and under security, authentication, and if we click here, you see that any option related to Entra ID has our tenant, this tenant where Copilot Studio is, where our API is. And this cannot be changed. No matter which one I use, it's the same tenant. You cannot change it. And that's why the option that we're going to be using is the custom connector. Let's see how we can do that. Let's see our connection that we've made for a second. So, as you can see here, we're providing the URL of our API. Okay, but then we're providing this application ID URI, which comes from here. And this application ID URI and this application, they both live in this tenant. And that's why if you change this to the application ID URI of some other application in another tenant, then you get an error because everything is related to the context of your current tenant where your Copilot Studio instance is. That's why using this approach works only within the current tenant of Copilot Studio, and for anything else we'll use custom connector. Now, just to show you that you cannot use this connector that we used before with this app registration, I'll add this here. Now, I'll edit this connector that we had, and I'll provide the application ID from this tenant here. So I'll change that, and also I'll change the base URL. Let's copy it and let's change it here and let's see what happens. Now I'll log in with the account from the other tenant. So Copilot Studio lives in this tenant here, and I'll log in with this other tenant now. And let's see what we got. And it says that you might have sent your authentication request to the wrong tenant. This is because there is no such application ID in your context tenant, which is the tenant of Copilot Studio instance. And that's why I was telling you that this is not possible, because this here is inside a completely separate tenant. And it's been looking for it inside the Copilot Studio instance tenant, and it can't find it. And that's why this approach only works when you're connecting to services inside the same tenant where Copilot Studio instance is. Let's now create a custom connector. Now, let's deploy our API to our second tenant. To do that, I'll switch to my other account, click on Create New, let's say tenant B. Okay, and let's click Finish. And we need to publish our API again, this time to this other tenant. So I already did that, but the process is the same. You click Publish, you choose Azure, you choose App Service. So I'm not going to do that again. Let's go back to Azure portal now. Let's click on Entra ID, see our app registration. Here it is. Let's see Expose an API. Okay, we have everything we need. Now we need to create a second app registration for our Copilot Studio custom connector. So that custom connector will use that application to authenticate with Azure Entra ID and call our API. Now, under API permissions, we need to add our API and the scope. We need to grant admin consent. And now let's go back to Power Apps, and on the left where it says custom connectors, and if you're not seeing it, click on More, Discover All, and then look for custom connectors, and you can add it from here. Now we need to create our custom connector from here. So there are a few options. One is to create it manually, another is to use the OpenAPI spec file. Well, we don't have that at this point. We'll be using the manual approach. Let's create from blank. For the host, let's see what our host is. For that, we need to go to our API and click copy here against default domain, paste it here. So let's go to security. We choose OAuth 2, and here we choose Azure Active Directory. We need to provide the client ID of our custom connector. Let's go to Entra ID, and here it is. Let's copy it, paste it here, and we need to create a secret. Okay, here is our secret. We paste it here. Our tenant, let's see, is this one. Paste it here. For the resource URL, let's go to API permissions, click here, and here it is. Paste it here, and the scope is here. Okay, now let's save for a second, because now we will get a redirect URI that we need to put in our app registration for the connector. And here it is. Copy it, go back to our custom connector app registration and add it here, and done. Okay. Next, let's go to definition, and here is where we are adding our endpoints basically. So let's fill this up. Let's create our request. So it's a GET request. Let's again copy our endpoint. It's HTTPS. This, then weather forecast. Click on import, update connector. Now let's try and create a new connection. And for that, now we're signing in with our other tenant's account. So not the tenant where Copilot Studio is, but the other tenant where we just deployed our API. Let's log in, and we're connected, which is great. Now let's go back and let's test our endpoint. And we got our response. So if we go back, if we try to call it directly, you get 401. Okay, so that's how you can create your own custom connector and connect to another tenant. Now that we have this custom connector, let's create an agent that uses it. So we'll create an agent. Now that our agent has been created, let's add a tool and let's search for our custom connector. Here it is. Let's add it. And now let's ask the agent about the weather forecast. Now it asks us to allow this connector. Let's click on allow. And here it is. Here is our weather forecast. So this worked.